Hey guys, I'm Dimension Jump and today I'll be reviewing Resident Evil 9 Requiem or Resident Evil Requiem. And this was released back on the 27th of February of this year. Now this is the most current Resident Evil game, and it's basically the main story is that you play as new character Grace Ashcroft, and she's investigating a series of weird things happening where these people who have like these black markings or these black splotches on their parts of their body are have been found in random areas, and she's been sent in to investigate because she works in the FBI, and this then leads her to meet up with the main villain of this game, as well as Resident Evil series veteran Leon Kennedy. And throughout the course of the game, you basically switch between both Grace and Leon, because Leon is also investigating this whole thing because he also has the same symptoms, that being another Resident Evil, the Raccoon City T virus strain or disease, or I think it in the game is called, like, there's like two versions of this. There's like the T virus strain, as well as the Raccoon City syndrome or something like that, where people who survive Raccoon City will start to develop this sort of like weird sort of black mold sludge thing on their skin. And Leon is one of those people who survived the events of Resident Evil 2 and 3. So yeah, he also has the same thing that the people found in these random locations have been. And yeah, and that's what I'm going to go with when it comes to the story, because this game is fairly new. It's been out when this video is released. It will be more than a week old. It's like a week and a few days since Resident Evil Requiem's been released. So I don't want to get into the story as a whole, because I want people to experience the whole story for themselves. And as a game, it's so cool because if you saw the trailers and saw interviews with the people making the game, this game has two different styles. That being, it's got the same sort of like genre you saw in Resident Evil 7 and 8, that being the first person perspective, as well as the things like as well as like the third person perspective from like Resident Evil 2, 3, 4 remakes, or even 5 and 6. And you can tell that there's a lot of Resident Evil references to the other games, whether that's the way you play or just some of the more smaller things. So for example, whenever you play as Grace, it's done in first person, and the horror is basically that of Resident Evil 7 and 8 when it came to like because you can in Resident Evil 7 and 8 you play through the eyes of Ethan Winters, and it's all done in first person perspective. So that was fun, and I think that was a really interesting way of playing Resident Evil games. And it's the same with Grace whenever you're playing through her sections, and because it's all done through her eyes, so you're experiencing the horrors and the scares and stuff like that through her own eyes. And with Leon, it's all action, like horror based. So kind of like, well, basically like Resident Evil 4 as well as its remake when it came to the whole action thing, because Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 4 remake were all like that sort of like action based, like the B horror type of game. And you can either see it in the sort of like way you can like handle the items, because with Grace, her item management is that of Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, which I think is quite cool. And you can find upgrades to help you get more items, and you can like mix and match stuff. Like you'll need like some herbs to combine so you can get more of a heal. You can also find med injectors here and there that you can use to heal. And also for Grace, she can find and use this blood collector thing, which can hold and store blood, and you can use it to form bullets and healing stuff. Well, kind of healing stuff, depending on the things. Well, not really healing stuff. I would say like the herbs you find are more used for healing stuff, but the blood injector is like used for more like offensive stuff. So like the bullets, as well as a new item you can use that you can inject into enemies and zombies, and they'll basically small item is basically a one-hit KO whenever you craft it, and yeah, and you can also upgrade the blood injector from like you can like collect 100 blood samples to 150, which is quite cool, because that means you can do more combinations of like more stuff and that sort of thing. So that's quite cool. And when it comes to Leon, when it comes to his inventory, it's basically that of Resident Evil 4 Remake, where you've got this big suitcase storage thing, and you can get like whole lot of stuff, and it feels like you're just playing as like the badass Leon Kennedy compared to like Grace, because Grace in this game, she starts off quite scared and not really confident in herself, but by the end of the game, you do see her more confident side, because she's been through this hell experience of just going from one place to the next and just fighting a whole bunch of zombies. So yeah, and now I'm going to show you the first few hours of the game. So just so I can keep clear of spoilers. So when it comes to the gameplay, for this part I'm playing as Grace, and as you can see, it's all done in first person, which I quite like. And even if you start the game with both perspectives in first person for Grace and third person for Leon, if you go into the menu, and here we go. So you can change the perspective. So let's say I want to have third person for Grace and for Grace and Leon. I can do that. So now I'm in first person as Grace. So I think it's interesting to see, or I think nice to have this sort of like feature in the game, so that people can have a bit of a different experience, like either having the entire game as either third person or first person, or depending on how they prefer, depending on the situation. But yeah, for this bit, I think it's better, in my opinion, to have. I think I do prefer it. I do prefer having it being done first person and for Grace, and first person for Grace and third person for Leon. Just because I think you definitely get that different experience. But I totally get if someone wants to play the game entirely in third person or entirely in first person, or have one character in plays one character in first person and the other character in third person, that sort of thing. I think it's very interesting. So yeah, now I'm going to show you Leon's perspective. So when it comes to Leon's gameplay, it's more action-packed, as you see, and there is some like action with his gameplay. You kind of can see a bit of that in the game, but for this, it's more horror-based than action-based. And with Leon, it's kind of basically the same. It's basically kind of like when it comes to his gameplay, it's basically like that in Resident Evil 4, where it's basically if you play Resident Evil 4, it's kind of like that. And yeah, I think it's really cool. Also, you can wield other weapons. So once chainsaw stops spinning, I'll show you. Hopefully one will stop spinning. But yeah, with Leon's gameplay, instead of having a knife like in Resident Evil 2 and 4, in the 2 and 4 remake, he has an axe, which you can sharpen. And also, if I can get
if we can get a headshot, we can, if I can, but like what I'm going to kind of do is like try and get a headshot. You can do a sort of like stun ability you can do, but it can be a bit difficult sometimes. So I would say when it comes to like headshots, you can try and get them, but it can be a bit difficult if enemies are going all about the place. Like, for example, the enemies with the chainsaws, that sort of thing. But I think, as a whole, Leon's gameplay is quite fun and it's quite enjoyable. So yeah, it's always cool to like try out like how it's done with Leon's gameplay. So here, as you can see, I can take a chainsaw. So yeah, I think that's quite cool because it allows us to try out different like combat skills and stuff like that, like how you can try like trying out different like combat scenarios, that sort of thing. So yeah. So that's been it for the gameplay. Now let's make it back to the review.
So, as a whole, Resident Evil Requiem is probably one of the best Resident Evil games to be released because it's so cool, and I think it continues the Resident Evil like storyline when it came to like, oh, you've got some plot points like into like locking with this story in Requiem. You get to see some references to previous games, that sort of thing. And yeah, I do like the whole different perspectives between Grace and Leon when it comes to like the story and how you play the game, because when it comes to the gameplay, you can switch perspectives, like, because the game does show like, oh, you can have one person in first person, another person in third person, and then you can switch if you want to, or you can have both people or both characters in first person or in third person. But the main thing is that you can, it's encouraged for you to play in first person as Grace and third person as Leon, but you can change it if you want to, and I think that's really, really cool. And I think as a whole, it sets up the future it sets up future games quite well, and maybe some potential DLC, maybe like Mercenaries mode or something related to other characters like Ada or Claire or something like that, when it comes to like how because they are also survivors of Resident Evil 2 and 3, so maybe something like that. Maybe we can see some of them, how they're doing, maybe. But yeah, I think Resident Evil Requiem is a very fun game, and I think for me, it's definitely one of my favorite Resident Evil games. It's definitely up there in my top 3. And I think it's also up there for Game of the Year right now, because it's a very, very fun game. I think it uses combat really well. I think the story is so good, and I think it's just so fun, just seeing all of these different like things and like these different like enemies you fight. And I think also the enemies are quite good, because when it comes to the zombies in the first area, they are your sort of typical zombies, but they're a different version of the zombies that we've seen in other Resident Evil games, because in Resident Evil Requiem, the zombies you fight have like a sort of their own personalities. So basically the last thing that they would have done before they became zombies. And that's really cool, because you get to see one that's a chef, one that's like basically a singer. You've got one that turns out the lights, that sort of thing. And that's a really cool way of interesting and basically introducing new and different enemies, but keeping the same sort of format. It's kind of like if you go from Resident Evil 7, so basically Biohazard with the molded, to Resident Evil 8. So basically, village with all the lichens and stuff. It's interesting to say, like, okay, we've got one form of enemy. That's kind of interesting. We've got the molded, but then you've got a new version, that being the lichens. That's sort of interesting. And yeah, I think as a whole, Resident Evil Requiem is probably my favorite game of this year so far, just because of all the cool stuff you can do in this game, and just the amount of stuff you can do, and just when it comes to like fighting enemies and stuff like that, and just the character interactions as well. I think that's also what makes this game really good. So yeah, that's been my review for Resident Evil Requiem. I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.